Okay, well, welcome. Thank you all for joining us again this evening. Just a couple of things before we get started this evening. I'm just going to quickly run through a few bits of housekeeping. First and foremost, we are live streaming the event this evening, so if you do not want to be on camera, do not sit in this kind of area. We'll also be taking some photos. If you would prefer not to be, or to appear in any of the photos, do let myself or one of the organisers make us aware. We'll make sure that your photo doesn't appear on social media. I'll introduce you to the organisers in a moment. We have two speakers this evening. So the format will be myself doing all the intros, then first speaker, short break. We'll finish off some drinks and food over there. Please help yourself to some swag on the table. And then we'll come back for the second and final speaker of the evening. Could I just ask, as I remind myself every month, to put your phones on silent, just out of respect for the speakers, please. If you do have any questions, would you please hold off asking those questions unless you're invited to by the speaker. There will be a Q&A session at the end of each of the talks. Wi-Fi is available. Cloudflare guest, hashtag save the internet. Rather bold statement for a password. Just out of interest, who's here for the first time this evening? Excellent. Well, welcome. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Really hope you enjoy it. Throughout this evening, we're continually looking for feedback. We're looking for ways we can continually improve WPLDN, make sure it is the most appropriate event for the community. Last month, in fact, we actually did a slightly different event. We met as a community at a local bar here and sat and talked about WPLDN and talked about the future of it, what that might look like. We listened, there was a load of feedback from members, and it was actually a really helpful night. There was so much good stuff that came out of it. There are some things that we're going to be changing around WPLDN going forward based on that feedback. So if you were able to make it last month, I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Your hosts this evening, the organisers, myself, Dan Mabey, at the back there, Diane Wallace, and next to her, Paul Smart. So if you do have any questions, any feedback, any thoughts, if you need any questions answered, do come and have a chat with one of us. We can certainly point you in the right direction if we can't answer the question for you. Sorry, I should have mentioned in the housekeeping there was no planned fire alarm, so if we do hear one, it is a genuine fire alarm. Back out the way we came in, and bathrooms, non-gender specific bathrooms at the end of the corridor here. I just wanted to WPLDN is a charity supporting and promoting positive mental health within the WordPress community. WPLDN is supported by a number of companies, including Green Geeks. If mental health related issues or having a better understanding of mental health within our community is of interest to you, then we'd love to see you over on our Slack team. It's an opportunity, it's a safe space where we can talk and discuss and meet new people. WPLDN.org/Slack. This evening wouldn't be possible without our sponsors. They help fund the catering, the swag, etc. So I just want to say a quick thank you to Green Geeks, fast, scalable and eco-friendly hosting. Plesk, the power to simplify, build and secure and run your web apps and websites. Web hosting crafted with care, SiteGround, and a digital experience platform built for growth, WP Engine. And finally, the WordPress multilingual plugin by Weglot. All of these companies are enabling us to continue to develop and create these events and hold these events. So if you want to give any of these companies, or in fact all of these companies, a big thanks on Twitter, we'd really appreciate that. Also just want to say a quick thank you to the venue, Cloudflare, for giving us a home this evening. The team, again, can be contacted on Twitter if you feel inclined to give them a thanks. The event is also supported by a number of companies, Blue37, Paul Smart and Sotic. The difference between sponsors and supporters: sponsors give financial support that enable us to pay for things. Supporters, such as Sotic, you'll see Leo at the back of the room there, giving his time to live stream the event for us this evening. So hello out there to everybody on the live stream. And as I say, if you don't want to be on that, please just steer clear of this area here. Our speakers this evening, we've got, as I mentioned, two. So Louise will be talking to us about taking WooCommerce to the next level with Laravel. And Graham will be asking the question, what the new HTML elements have done for accessibility for us. So looking forward to hearing both of those. But before we go into that, just wanted to give you an opportunity within the community announcements. If you're aware of anything that's going on in and around the community, if you're aware of any events that are happening, maybe there's some training happening somewhere, maybe you're looking to hire, maybe you want to be hired, just an opportunity for you to stick your hand up and just let us know what's going on. So is anybody aware of anything that's going on in and around the community at the moment? Anybody hiring? Anybody looking to be hired?
Thank you. My company's hiring to replace me, actually, a full-stack WordPress developer. I've got some job description in my bag. If anyone's interested, just shout me up after the meetup.
Excellent. Again, so what's the company?
Landor Associates.
Landor Associates. Excellent. Thank you. So there's a full-stack developer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, we're having a WP Hooked meetup on Tuesday, the 10th of September, and talking about JS authentication and the WordPress REST API with a deep dive into JWT.
Very cool. Thank you. So for those who don't know, WP Hooked is another London-based meetup.
I believe there's a WordCamp in Dublin in October.
There certainly is. I'll give you some more details on that in a moment. Anybody else aware of anything going on in and around the community at all? Graham.
Thank you. As well as the Dublin one, I also believe that there's a Leeds one in preparation as well. I'm not sure exactly when it is. I think it's probably going to be November. But there we go.
WordCamp Leeds. No, as far as we know, so WordCamp Leeds is happening. There is no confirmed date at the moment. I think, as you mentioned, September, October. I think it's moved more towards November. Yes, yeah. I couldn't find a date, unfortunately. If you're not aware of a WordCamp, essentially a WordCamp is a conference supporting the WordPress ecosystem. They're events run by volunteers within the WordPress community. They are intended to be as accessible and as open to as many as possible. So to give you an idea, WordCamp Dublin is happening on the 19th to the 20th of October. This event, tickets for this two-day tech conference are available for €25. Now that €25 does not only give you access to the two-day tech conference, it also gives you lunch, it also gives you an after party, it gives you swag, it gives you so much. And I really highly recommend, if you've not been to a WordCamp before, to head over to wordcamp.org, and you will see that there are WordCamps happening globally. And they are a really great opportunity to connect with the community. A really good way to get involved, if you've never been to a WordCamp before, is to actually sign up and volunteer, because it gives you a reason to be there. It gives you an opportunity to communicate and connect with people at the event. It's a really good way to expand your network and just to get a bit more integrated within the community. As I say, WordCamps happen all over the world. We have several of them throughout the UK. We also, as I mentioned, we've also got WordCamp Leeds is the next one coming up within the UK. Unfortunately, there is no confirmed date at this moment. These WordCamps and a number of meetups and a number of other things are all discussed over on the UK Slack team. If you're not using Slack, or if you are using Slack, sorry, if you want to head over to wpslack.uk, drop your email address in there, you'll get an invite to join the team. Once you head in, you'll find many channels, that some are location specific, so there is a number of London channels. You'll also find there are non-area specific, so you've got design, you've got development, you've got, dare I mention it, politics? There are many channels in there. There's a live channel. There's things that you can get in and just have a conversation with other community members. It's a great place. If you meet people here this evening and want to continue the conversation, you may find that they will be in this Slack team. Another event that's happening, WordSesh. If you're not familiar with WordSesh, it's an online conference. Head over to wordsesh.com, 25th of September for the next virtual conference. Kicks off 8 AM UK time. Number of really good speakers coming up on that event. So well worth heading over to wordsesh.com and taking a look to see what's happening. Some of you may have heard of this, some of you may not. This is a challenge that myself and a number of others, including the man at the back there with his hands in his pockets, Mr. Smarts, are going to be undertaking. We are riding 3,000 kilometres across 6 countries over 30 days to raise awareness of positive physical and mental health within our community. So we're riding from the 2019 venue, the WordCamp Europe 2019 venue in Berlin, Germany, through to the 2020 venue in Porto, Portugal. So that's a lovely 3,000 kilometre ride. There are many ways. If you're interested in potentially getting involved in some way, and there are lots of ways that you can get involved in this project, not necessarily just riding a bike, please do head over to head2.org or follow us along on hashtag head2WCEU. And it would be great to see you. Head over there, you can subscribe, get some more information. If you're interested in riding, subscribe. We will just send you a notification when the application to ride opens up. We will also be sharing more details of what's happening as we progress through this project. Okay, that's enough from me. Unless anybody else had any other community announcements they wanted to share with us at all? No? Okay, so I'm now going to introduce you to Louise Towler. Louise joins us from Indigo Tree tonight. Louise is going to be giving her talk, taking WooCommerce to the next level with Laravel. So we just give you a moment. So just while Louise is getting herself set up there, has anybody considered supporting Head2 in any way? Are people aware of the project? People thought about riding at all? Anybody fancy riding 3,000 kilometres across Europe to support? A few tentative yeses, tentative no's. We are going to be offering the opportunity for people to join us at segments of the ride as well. So if you're interested in riding, you don't have to ride the full 3,000 kilometres. We will have an opportunity for people to join us for 3 days, and we will have an opportunity for people to join us for 1 day. So again, if that's of interest to you, then do let us know. So I'm now going to hand you over to Louise, so please give Louise a big round of applause.
Good evening. Right, so my name's Louise Towler from Indigo Tree. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me? Yeah?
A bit closer.
A bit closer, okay. Louise Towler from Indigo Tree. We're a WordPress digital agency based in Berkhamsted in Hertfordshire. And I'm going to talk tonight about taking WooCommerce to the next level with Laravel. So what I'm actually going to do is show you how we built a packing application for a warehouse that integrates with the WordPress and WooCommerce REST API. The project itself included building a WordPress plugin to add custom endpoints for the WooCommerce orders, using webhooks and WebSockets for real-time order information, integrating with various different shipping providers that were options on the WooCommerce website, and then we also integrated the application with the Google Print Cloud API to print out shipping labels. We built the actual Laravel application with Vue.js. So we started off with a client, Shake That Way, who sells diet shakes and diet meal plans to consumers. He gets hundreds of orders a day, and he has a warehouse in Stoke with 2 or 3 packers packing boxes of orders and posting them out on a daily basis. And he's shipping with various different carriers depending on location of the order and also how quickly people want the order delivered. And his warehouse was using a very old packing application. There were quite a lot of problems with it. It was extremely difficult for them to maintain. It was written in .NET and using a very old version of the WooCommerce API, and basically the original developers didn't really want to continue maintaining it. It was also really, really slow, so it took the packers a long time as it was pulling orders down from the website. And the packers are working quite quickly on 24-inch touchscreen monitors, so that was becoming a real problem for them. And when they had a lot of orders, it was getting quite glitchy. So we had some requirements. He sent over a whole load of screenshots of what the old application looked like. And the key thing was he needed to get orders from the website. And all of the packing that was done and all the order information all had to be accessible via a touch screen, no mouse, just literally people tapping on a screen. And the packers needed to be able to view all the orders. They needed some search functionality around the name of the person who'd ordered, order number and postcode, and also needed to be able to filter orders by things like order status, whether it was completed, whether it was on hold, whether it was processing. And he also, the current application that he had some quite complicated calculations around what box size to pack each order into based on the volume of the products that are in that order. But they also had a bit of a problem with it because they kept on running out of certain sizes of boxes. So one of the things he asked us to build into the new application was actually keeping track of how many boxes of different sizes they had in stock. And originally we were thinking about using the website for that, but actually although the WooCommerce website itself was great for managing stock control on the products, there's no point having stock control for a product that isn't actually being sold. So we ended up deciding to manage all of that via the application that we were building. And then when the packers were actually packing the orders, what we needed to do was make sure that the information that the order had been packed, by which packer, what time, what packing station, all those sorts of details were actually pushed back up to the website, so then the website could send out things like the confirmation emails to the customer. So there was information coming from the website and then information being sent back to the website. So our solution was a Laravel application, and this diagram shows basically the actual flow of how all the information and the data works. On the top left half of the diagram is essentially the WordPress and WooCommerce website, and on the right hand side is the flow of information and actions for the Laravel application that we built. So I'm going to talk through now some of the things we did to actually make this work. So first of all, we utilised the fact that it's possible already in WooCommerce to set up webhooks, so that whenever something happens in WooCommerce relating to an order, it can fire a webhook, and that functionality is all built in. We've set up on the website so that the webhooks are managed with a WordPress cron job, and after 1 minute, it fires a webhook into the application. So when an order changes, the webhook on the website basically is fired, and what it does is it sends and stores a pointer into the cache of the Laravel application. It's essentially telling the application that there's either a new order or an update to an existing order that the application needs to know about. We don't want any sort of random people hitting those endpoints, so along with the webhook, we send a WooCommerce secret as part of the webhook payload, and then we verify that this matches the private key in the application. And the webhook controller creates the pointer in the cache. We do it this way because we don't actually want to rely on how the application is syncing the data with WooCommerce. We actually want to tell the application there's information ready to sync, but we don't want to send it through in that first fire to sort of basically, just in case something fails. So the pointer tells the application that there's order data, essentially, that's waiting to be found. And every 5 minutes on the Laravel side, we run a Laravel queued job, which is like a cron job, and it looks to see if there's any pointers. And if there's any pointers existing, then the application goes to the website and grabs the order data. It pulls the latest actions from the website. And the order data includes things like the products, the customer, the shipping carrier, and the order status. The benefits of this approach are that we're not actually pulling down all orders from the website. When we actually investigated the old application, we realised one of the reasons it was so slow was every single time it was actually pulling down all the order information, whereas all we're doing is pulling down orders relating to the pointers, relating to anything that's changed. And also, we're not constantly polling WordPress. If they don't get any orders for half an hour, no pointers exist, and then there's no reason to go to the application to go to WordPress. So when it's quiet, we're not constantly hitting the WordPress website for information which isn't necessary. It only goes to the website if a pointer's been added. When it comes to actually authenticating and getting the specific order information from the website, we're using the JWT authentication plugin. We had a few issues with this because the website itself is also using various plugins associated with WooCommerce, like PayPal, and actually the REST MP. We found that there were some issues occasionally where we actually think that the REST API was being hit simultaneously and things were getting in a bit of a muddle, but we managed to sort that out. We contact the WooCommerce API using a plugin that we specifically wrote, and we set up custom endpoints for that. So the application basically gets the action and accepts the data. It's all authenticated, and it only asks for the data that's passed since a certain time since it's last asked for data. And then the WordPress website sends back all the actions back to the Laravel application, and all that order information is stored in the application's database. So at that point, the order information is saved in two different databases, the website and the application. We could have tried to build something which used the WordPress database, but we wanted to keep them completely separate so that in the future we could do all sorts of things and we weren't relying on an application being hosted on the same hosting as the WordPress website, which with the benefit of hindsight was definitely a good call. When it comes to updating orders, we wanted the WooCommerce website to be the source of truth because that's where all the emails are being sent out to the customers. So we have to always make sure that whatever changes to orders are being made by the application, that information is being passed back to WooCommerce. So when the packer marks an order as completed in the packing application on their order screen, the application uses the WooCommerce REST API to update the status of the order on the website, and it adds the note with the details, plus also it's updating the application's database. Now, of course, at that point, the order on the website has been updated, and this actually then triggers the cron on the website to set another pointer in the application. It's sort of almost going around in a bit of a circle here. And so what actually happens eventually is that that same order update ends up being updated again within the application. But we don't mind doing that because we want to make sure that the application database and the WooCommerce database are always kept in sync, and the WooCommerce database is the one that's the source of truth. So, and when in the queued job, when the website receives the action, it sends something to Pusher. And what basically we make sure is that the application syncs all the order information on all the different packing screens as well. So as soon as a packer's completed an order, all the other packers are aware that that order's also been completed. So there's quite a lot going on there, but we're just trying to make sure the whole time that the WordPress website is kept up to date. When it comes to shipping, this was actually something that we, with the benefit of hindsight, probably underestimated. Initially, we started off with Royal Mail and DPD, and the shipping providers gave us the documentation for their APIs, which all had the same flow, and the client was using the shipping providers' plugins on the website, so we assumed it would be great. The customer would choose the shipping provider they wanted to use, or based on their location and the time of the delivery, the correct one would be chosen. And then that we would just integrate with the shipping provider's API to get the correct format label generated to put on the box. So initially we integrated DPD and Royal Mail to provide the correct labels for the correct shipping providers to put on each box. And the way we did that is the application actually sends up a consignment to the shipping for that order, along with things like network code, service codes, delivery details, next day, instructions, box size, weight, all that sort of information. And the way the APIs work, the response that they return is essentially the label that needs to be printed and put on the box. And when we have that label information, we store it locally within the application. However, we did have some learnings. First of all the APIs are really rubbish at reporting errors. It is just unbelievably bad. So, for example, DPD return a response code of 200 when you get an error. Really unhelpful. Took us quite a while to realise that that really didn't mean it had worked. And things like we've had issues with addresses with using Greek characters, weight over a certain limit, dimensions of boxes not really quite suiting things, services limited by area. So even though the plugin side on the website worked and it accepted the order and calculated the cost of it, actually when it came to printing the label, that's another matter. So in the end we decided we couldn't assume it would be possible to print a label just because that was what was chosen on the website, and we put quite a lot of extra validation into the application our end to handle data before it was being sent up to the shipping provider's API. And we also built in the ability for the packers to adjust details. For example, if they noticed that an address wasn't going to be correct, they could actually adjust it on their screens if there were obvious issues. And then any changes like that were then pushed back up to the website once the order was completed. We also added a lot of error reporting as well, so that if there was a problem printing a label, the packers got some feedback on exactly why, because just having a response code of 200 really isn't helpful. When it came to printing the labels, we decided to use the Google Cloud print service to give the application flexibility of adding printers on different networks for different warehouses. We also found Google doesn't make this very easy. There was a lot of setup required with printer groups to give the correct workstations different access. And when we set things up for a specific computer in the warehouse, we've actually made it so that that computer by default stores a cookie when the computer's set up, and that cookie basically identifies which printer labels should be printed to. We also did some stuff with something called ngrok tunnels. I don't really understand, to do with if the printer's on a local host and making sure that we got a secure tunnel from the API endpoint to the local printer. So when the packer wants to print a label from their workstation, as well as the label information that's sent up, we actually also send up information from the cookie as well about which printer that label is being expected to print to, as part of the shipping API request. So when it's returned to us with the format of the label, that information that's stored in the application along with the label as well as the actual label itself, is also storing what printer that label is going to be printed out on as well. And then the application can send the API request to Google Print Service and sends the link to the label, and then the Google Print Service will choose the correct printer to print it out on. So in addition to the front end of the application, we also built a back end. So the front end is all touch screen, and the packers just log in using a code. We've also secured it so that you can only access the application from certain IP addresses and all that sort of thing to make it a lot more secure. But we also built into the Laravel application a admin area for an administrator to do things like set up new users. So users in the warehouse can't do things like change their PIN codes or their passwords or anything to do with their user account. That all has to be done by an administrator. And the administrator can add accounts, update accounts, delete, change PINs, all that sort of thing. The administrator can also assign shipping method names to the correct API service codes, because things do change when it comes to some of the shipping carriers. And as I said previously, we set it up so they could manage box sizes, volumes, and also stock control on the boxes as well. When a box is out of stock, it will work out then the next best size of box or boxes to use. And we also built in some basic reports, numbers of orders per day, numbers of orders with the different shipping carriers, number of orders on hold, number of orders waiting to be packed, and the quantity of each box size remaining, so that our client, who's the sort of main manager of the warehouse, can actually manage things easily, even if he's not physically there. So I'm just going to show you some of the screens. So here's an example of an order status screen listing all the orders. You can sort by the various columns and also see some basic numbers at the top about how many orders have been packed and are waiting to be collected, how many are still waiting to be packed, and then there's some colour coding on the screen itself saying which ones have been completed and which ones are being processed as well. And this shows an order to be packed. So once a packer has actually clicked and said they're going to pack an order, that order is locked, so you can't get two packers trying to pick the same order simultaneously. And along with the list of how many of each of the items in the order, we're also pulling down the featured images from the website as well, just to, again, give the packers that sort of visual clue of what it is that they're packing, and that helps to sort of make it less error-prone as well. And finally, this is what the screen looks like when an order has been completed. So again, you can see all the products that are in the order, the information about where it's being shipped to, and information on when it was picked and packed. So, of course, we launched the website earlier this year, and immediately there was a long list of extra features to be added. So the sorts of things that we've been working on in the past few months to improve on it is adding extra shipping. So now they're also shipping with using Parcel Hub's API, which particularly Hermes. The packer is actually able to change the shipping method, and then that will go back up to the website as part of the notes on when it was packed, and can print out multiple shipping labels per order, either because the printer didn't print properly, or if an order's split over more than one box, sometimes it's necessary to print additional labels. We also, the client also asked us to add some flags around if it was an international order, and in fact I had an email this afternoon about some extra requirements after the 31st of October. Some of the shipping carriers are going to require extra consignment information as part of the label and packing slips, so we're going to have to do some work on that in the next couple of months, but I'm not going to mention why. Packers can now give a reason of why they've put an order on hold, and that obviously then helps inform people on if that order can be taken off hold and repacked. Packers can also sort completed orders, and that just helps them manage the boxes and the orders in the warehouse. We've added a lot more improved error messaging, so when there's an issue and the packers aren't being given information about why for some reason a label can't be printed or something's not quite right with an order, then we're trying to keep on building in extra error information to mean that that doesn't happen again. And the final thing is we've actually now got it working with multiple WooCommerce websites. So it's now at the moment pulling down orders from more than one website, and in fact within the next week or couple of weeks we're rolling out some international websites, and it will be pulling down orders from those as well. So finally, my final slide about this is just showing I went and visited the warehouse in Stoke, and this is one of the screens showing the actual packing application at a packing station. And it's really nice when you build something and it's all very virtual to actually see it working in reality with the boxes in the background and the products waiting to be packed. So I'm very happy to talk to anybody about how we built this, and if anybody would be interested in finding out some more. In a bit of a shameless plug, we're Indigo Tree. This is a picture of the team. We're powering business growth with expert digital solutions, and I'm always interested in finding people with interesting problems to solve. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So I'm not sure where the other microphone's gone. Diane.
Hi, I've got it's quite similar. It's something, it's going from a WooCommerce install to Salesforce to make opportunities and record all the products. And I was just wondering, like right at the start, when you talked about the setting up webhooks in WooCommerce, I noticed that you put a cron to run them. Was that right? So the internal WooCommerce one of on order change and on order new, did you have problems with those by any chance?
No, not as far as I'm aware. I can't personally say I had any problems with any of it.
Okay.
Because I have someone half my age who built this all for us. But I can't recall there being any issues, although I know this whole project actually it was a lot more complex than we originally anticipated. And I know we had some issues with various bits of the REST API, but I couldn't tell you specifically.
Okay,
I'd have to go back and ask.
I was just wondering, but you've set something up that checks
basically, because it doesn't actually need to be real time. It needs to be fairly immediate, but it doesn't matter if the order information doesn't get from the website to the application for 5 minutes. That's really the thing. It doesn't actually need to be done in real time.
Okay, another technical question, so it's all right if you don't answer it. I'm just curious if your databases go out of sync, because you've got a Laravel database and a WooCommerce. So let's say the Laravel database is updated and it crashes. So do you know how do you recover? At a high level, I'm not going to go just.
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that, but I know that we have had issues with the databases not being quite synced, but it hasn't been a problem to sort it out. I think essentially you can go in and you can do things like if you know there's an issue with particular orders not being synced, of course, we can just go into the back end of the WordPress website, do something to change the order. At that point, it will fire off the cron job, which will set the pointer, and then it will sync the information down. When it comes to syncing it back up, we definitely had some problems with the REST API, and there was one particular Saturday they were taking loads and loads of orders, and I think some of the calls were literally simultaneous, and the WordPress website wasn't coping with that particularly well, but we sorted it all out on Monday morning.
Thank you.
Hi, it's more than a question. It's related to the cron job is mentioned, you have the same thing as well. Actually, yeah, because I just happened in my mind, like you can use queue messaging system or event sourcing, especially you're connecting two systems together. So it will be like real time, but at the same time, the system will not work unless there is something to push. So if you use message queue system, you can only send this notification to the other system only when something happened. And you will reserve the message and you can retry if it crashes. So it's just a point of view.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's better than using cron when you connect two systems together.
Okay.
Brilliant. Louise, thank you very much. Really appreciate you giving your time this evening. We're just going to take a short break now. For those of you, in fact, I'm not sure there was a slide, but I seem to have missed it. WPLDN has actually turned 11 years old today. Woo! It seems to have just kind of snuck up on us a bit. So, Diane, thank you very much. Diane's had to head out and grab some cake. So if you want to go and grab some WPLDN birthday cake, please feel free. There's also some drinks and some food and some swag. Do please feel free, help yourself. And we'll come back here in about 10 minutes for the second speaker. Okay, I think we're ready for the next session. Can I ask you just to take your seats? I see all the cake went there. Thank you all so much for taking your seats so quickly. I'd now like to introduce you to Graham. Graham is a web accessibility consultant, owns his own company called Caulfield Consulting. Going to be giving his talk this evening, what have HTML elements ever done for accessibility? So please give Graham a big round of applause.
Conundrum now, I've got a clicker, and I've got a bottle of beer and a microphone. Anyone spot the problem? Okay, right, well I'll just have to put that down for a minute, won't I? Anyway, okay, so as you can see, my talk is called What Have HTML5 Elements Ever Done for Accessibility? This is not the first time I run this talk, but it's certainly the first time in London. And so here's the official title slide. But some of you will understand where this comes from. Who's seen this film? Most people, I should imagine. Okay. What? Hey? Yeah, right, okay. So, what I'm going to, before I actually get into the presentation, those of you who don't know me, I'm a web accessibility consultant. That is my main day job. And so what does that actually mean, I hear you say? Well, actually, at the moment, my day job is helping web developers and also app developers get the accessibility of their digital products correctly, right. By accessibility, I mean making sure that everyone can access it, irrespective of how they access the web and irrespective of any disability or impairment. So I actually do a lot of training courses for developers and for designers and testers as well. And I work with project teams to actually help them get this right. I am a WordPress developer. I don't do this quite so much these days, but I've actually built quite a few accessible WordPress websites over the years. People used to come to me all the time because they knew that I could actually do it. But as I say, I don't do much now. I collaborate with other people, developers, to actually, when I get asked to do this sort of thing. I've contributed to the WordPress accessibility team in the past. I'm not as active as I used to be, but I have actually got some changes within WordPress which have improved the accessibility predominantly of the admin area in the past. What I'm going to talk about, okay, now HTML5 was defined probably about 10 years ago. I've been freelance for 10 years now, and HTML5 was sort of emerging around the same time. And there's quite a lot of new stuff, or new, in inverted commas, now, in the last 10 years. Quite a lot of new elements and attributes and what have you. And recently, like towards the end of last year, I undertook a study to see how the HTML5 elements could help with accessibility. One of the reasons for doing this is because when I work with project teams, I often come across a lot of custom components. Things like accordions, tab panels, combo boxes and what have you. And I see some dreadful, dreadful examples. Stuff that's not at all accessible. The favourite of mine is like where you get all these, like an accordion or something like that, that can only be operated if you can use a mouse or touch the screen, right? Not even keyboard accessible at all. Obviously, if you're using a screen reader, you get nowhere with it, right? So I thought, well, there's a lot of HTML5 stuff out there, sitting there. Let me have a look at some of these things and see what they've delivered for an accessibility perspective. So, featuring my presentation this evening is going to feature some semantic sectioning elements, dialog boxes, new input types, or some other form-related elements. Like this is actually things like a combo box, and native accordions. So I'm going to look at this. This is not by any means all of the HTML5 elements that were introduced, have been introduced, but it's just a selection. I've blogged about some of these, and I'll show you links as we go through. I'll publish the slides on SlideShare tomorrow and then circulate the links afterwards, but please do take pictures as you go. And let's talk about the accessibility requirements, because obviously this is about thinking about how these things are accessible. So to be considered accessible, each of these elements that I'm going to look at must be supported by all these users. Firstly, mouse users, and that's probably most of us. I also include trackpad in there, since actually I seem to be in a minority these days and still actually using a mouse. But people using touch screens, whether it's on the laptop like here, or on a mobile device of some sort, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone or the Android equivalents. Keyboard users, these are people who can see, but for some reason of some physical impairment, can't actually use a mouse or a trackpad or whatever, so they rely on keyboard accessibility. Then we've got, we're into the territory of assistive technologies, screen reader users, typically blind people, but not always blind people. There are screen readers out there for dyslexics as well. And then also voice recognition users. This is a pieces of software that are used typically by people with motor impairments. So what I'm looking at in the accessibility requirements is that so all of these people can actually use these elements properly, or easily. So my first section is around the semantic sectioning elements. Now I'm sure all of you who have seen these. So let me talk a little bit about history of page layouts. Some of us have been in the web industry a lot longer than the others. So when I first started in the web, this is how we did it. This was cutting edge stuff, right? Yeah, you too, eh? Right, okay. Okay, so here we got like frame sets and what have you. That's how we do a typical page layout. But then things moved on, didn't they? We migrated to layout with tables. Remember that? So much easier, wasn't it? Okay? But then we all discovered the float. Do you remember the float? And this is our page layout once we've discovered the float. We've got divs. Right, okay. Okay. With floats and what have you. But here, with the introduction of ARIA some years ago, ARIA being a series of accessible attributes, this is the first time that we actually started to have some kind of meaning put on all our divs or sections within the page. Notice the roles here. Now these are still valid, okay, but part 5 of our history of page layouts is this, okay? See what I did there? Okay, so we got like header, nav, main, aside, footer, etc. Now, okay, so I bet who's not using these elements in websites that they're building? Who's keeping with divs? No one. Okay, right. Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, right. That's okay. Yeah, you're just moving along there till you see it's like, to see whether or not they're supported on it. Okay, so a lot of people are using these now, and that's good. And you think, fine, marvellous. We all know HTML5, don't we? That's it. Okay, so these sectional HTML5 elements, yes, they can be used as styling hooks, so your banner can look different to your main content, etc. And you can have like headers within your main content and what have you. Do what there's a lot of things you can do. It's very flexible with these elements. But they're semantic elements. And the reason why they're there as semantic elements is to help people who have accessibility needs, because they actually become landmarks, some of them. And landmarks are used by people who use screen readers to actually delimit parts of the page. So if I'm a screen reader user and I arrive at a brand new page, typically I want to see the main content of that page quickly. And so I can actually then use the facilities within my screen reader to jump straight to the main landmark of that page, which equates to the main element in HTML5. So, some of these HTML5 elements are always landmarks. That's main, nav, and aside, okay? Some of them are sometimes landmarks. So, headers and footers, they are landmarks as long as they're not contained inside other elements like here, like the main, article, aside, nav, or section, okay? And it's quite complicated, these rules, but browsers can deal with this, and also screen readers can deal with this too. And then we've got section and article at the end, and these can be landmarks if they're actually labelled up using these ARIA attributes of ARIA label or ARIA labelled by. So what we're doing here is using these semantic HTML5 elements, we're saying where all the different regions of the page are, okay? And this makes life a lot easier for screen reader users. And the accessibility support, remember those 5 tests I had? Obviously, you know, this is around like laying out the page, so it's less important for keyboard users or mouse users and what have you, but it's pretty universal, even if you're using IE 11 with JAWS screen reader. So, I think a recommendation here is to go ahead and use them. Make sure you use them properly, of course, because they actually enhance the accessibility of your pages. So if you're building a website, typically I suppose probably looking at using a WordPress theme, use these things properly and they certainly will improve the accessibility of your website. And if you're using you know, the landmarks actually to label, you can actually use the ARIA label attribute to actually disambiguate. So for example, many websites have multiple navigation. So you've got the main navigation at the top, you might have some secondary navigation at the bottom, and of course, like if you think about it, like other navigation in amongst the sidebars and what have you, and maybe a breadcrumb trail as well. So you can use the ARIA label to actually label those, as the BBC website does. If you look here, this is using a browser extension called Landmarks. It's showing me all the landmarks on the page. This is the list of the things that a screen reader is going to use. Notice I've got a banner, a navigation, main content here, but I've got another navigation. So the BBC are using the ARIA label to actually disambiguate my various navigations here. And the BBC is always a good example of how to do stuff in an accessible way. So, that's the end of the thing on sectioning elements. That's a good success. Nice one. The next thing I want to talk about is associating captions with images. And I want to look at 2 elements here that you may have come across before, the figure and the fig caption. Now, the figure can contain all kinds of stuff. Like in some of the good things about HTML5 is that it can be a bit ambiguous. Some of the bad things about HTML5, it can be a bit ambiguous. So a figure and a fig caption, the figure doesn't have to contain an image, it can contain other stuff too. But how you will have come across this, I'm sure, is if you've used captions in WordPress. Okay, so here's a picture of Bristol Harbour with a caption. I'm not talking about the alternate text here, I'm talking about the caption. So in the olden days of WordPress themes, you will have a div here with a class of WP caption with an alignment of some sort, and inside there's the image tag and then a paragraph, which is the actual caption, okay? So physically, the paragraph is adjacent to the image, but there's no linkage here. So screen reader users don't necessarily know that this paragraph is linked to that image. So if you, in your WordPress theme, enable HTML5 support, and you then put a caption on your image, the markup that you will get is this. It will put out a figure element, which contains the image, but it will also put out this fig caption element here as well, which will contain the actual caption. So the idea here of the HTML5 element is that it will actually kind of link the caption to the image, right? So that screen reader users will know that they're linked. But the reality is a little shady on this one. So I've written a blog about this. Oh, no, I didn't. This is not a blog I wrote. But you can find out more about how to add HTML5 element theme support here. Accessibility support. I did a survey when I put this talk together a few months ago, and there is very, very little support within screen readers for the fig caption being programmatically linked to figure. Really, really little support here. The good news, though, is that using this pattern doesn't spoil the accessibility of your website. So our recommendation would be to go ahead and use it, but don't actually rely on it giving you anything, right? It's a good idea to always, though, set the appropriate alternate text on the image itself, because that is something that screen reader users are going to actually get. And this is the bit where I did actually write a blog post about this. And when I post the slides, obviously you can see all these links here to read up on the background or what have you. Okay, next thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to jump to dialog boxes. When we've got modals within our websites, for whatever reason, whether it's a light box or some other reason like an address search or something like that, these can be a bit of a challenge for some people with accessibility, especially for keyboard users who can contain, or if I'm using a desktop or a laptop, will actually include users of screen readers as well. Because we need to make sure that keyboard focus goes to the right place. When I open a modal window, I want keyboard focus to go into that modal. Otherwise, a screen reader user or might not have any idea that the modal's opened, and a keyboard user, sighted keyboard user, might find that they can't actually get to it. We need to make sure that focus is constrained, keyboard focus is constrained there. Otherwise, it's not a modal, really. So we need to do that. And also, when either we've done something in the modal or we've said, nah, not interested, and press the cancel button or the close button, we need to put focus back to where it was before. Otherwise, we cause a bit of difficulty for people if we just randomly throw it anywhere else on the page. So, there are lots of accessible patterns for modals out there, which of course rely on JavaScript and some ARIA. And you could use one of them, that's fine. But if there was a native element that did all this for you, that where the browser gave you all the functionality and the browser gave you all the accessibility, that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? And that's what dialog was originally minted for. So, here we go, the theory. I've got some content in my dialog element. And yes, I do need a bit of JavaScript because I need to actually open it. So, obviously I name the dialog, and in my JavaScript I just do a show modal and it opens, triggered by a button of some sort, okay? And in Chrome on Windows 10, on my machine here, this is what you see in the dialog, okay? It's a bit rough and ready, the styling, but I've got some content in here and a button that says close me. However, browser support is a bit weak on this. It's only supported by Blink-based, that's hard for me to say, Blink-based browsers. So that's effectively Chrome and Opera. If anyone's ever using that, I don't know. But the new Edge, when the new Chromium-based Edge comes along, will probably support it too. But it doesn't work at all in Firefox or Safari, or perhaps not surprisingly, in Internet Explorer 11. Also, in Chrome, if you've got a long dialog for any reason, say you've got an address search and your postcode has multiple addresses because you've got lots of flats in your postcode, then when you scroll the dialog, the whole page scrolls up as well, which is not always what you want. They're very tricky to style, and there are also rumours that this is actually going to be stripped out of the HTML5 spec soon. Even though it would be quite useful if it worked, wouldn't it? So, accessibility support, actually in Chrome, is pretty good. And if you're a keyboard user, then by default, when it opens, focus does go into the modal. However, focus goes to the first tabbable element in your dialog box, which may, of course, be the close button, which is right at the very bottom. of the dialog box. That's not that useful really. It's sometimes much more useful to put focused something at the top of the page, okay? When you close the dialog box, focus does not go back to where it was before. And screen readers just can't deal with this at all, basically. It has no concept of that it's a dialog box or that anything useful is actually going on. So sadly, there's a bit of a red non-smiley face there. Even with polyfills, it's not ready for production sites. There's a few resources. I did not write these blog posts, but this Scott O'Hara, he's done a lot of good stuff on HTML5, and also the Paciello group has got some useful blogs as well on accessibility. They've written about this as well, so that I don't have to. Okay, let's move on to something new. Input types. HTML5, as you probably knew, introduced several input types. I'm going to look at 5 here. There are loads and loads of new input types, but I'm only going to consider these 5, right? So what can they do for us? Let's look at these 2 first, number and tell. The theory is it's easier for users to get the format of the input correct, mainly on mobile devices, because obviously on a desktop I can type what the hell I like into these full fields, but on a mobile device I'm kind of at the mercy of what the keyboard that gets put out. So they should trigger slightly different numeric keyboards, and they can also trigger browser validation, which might be useful. And this also happens on desktop browsers as well. So for example, input type equals number on my Android phone. If I submit the form but haven't typed anything in here, I get a message out. The browser puts that there. It says, please enter a number. So on iOS and Android devices, yeah, they're fine. It works marvelously, okay? On desktop and laptop browsers, it shows a spinner for the number input field, which is kind of useful. It's not useful, it's not at all supported in IE 11 though. Accessibility support. The browser error messages that you get out aren't always read by screen readers. They also they're not really specific. If you've got multiple number fields on your page, the browser error messages don't differentiate which input field it is that's actually, for a screen reader user it doesn't differentiate which input field it is that is actually giving the input. So if you've got multiple numeric inputs, like you've got telephone numbers or account numbers or whatever, that's not very useful. So yeah, sure, on a mobile device, it is quite useful to use input type equals number and telephone, but actually don't rely on the browser navigation. It's not good enough, and it's not always accessible. So actually put your own custom validation routines in there. Looking at URL and email, similar sort of theory. It changes the appropriate keyboard, changes the keyboard on mobile devices to bring in appropriate symbols. So, for example, type equals URL shows a slash and maybe a www, and type equals email shows the @ sign and also .com. And this is an example, once again, Chrome from my Android phone. Note that the @ symbol has come into what is the letter keyboard here, and the .com as well. So, browser support, once again, on iOS and Android devices, pretty good, okay? All desktop browsers, including IE 11, shock horror probe, actually do trigger browser validation on the format and will show the error messages. Sometimes, however, the format for, like for example, for email, the browser validation is not really always what you'd expect. And the same problems are there. The browser messages are not that informative, and they're not always voiced by screen readers. Certainly, if you're using JAWS, you never get to hear any of these messages. So, you know, recommendation is, yeah, okay, it's good for the convenience of the appropriate symbols, but make sure you have your own validation routines in there that are much more informative. And make sure that also, if you're going to do any format-specific stuff, make sure that's in the label as well. Okay, input type equals date. This is an interesting one, and because it's so interesting, I need to take a little swig. To make sure my throat can deal with this one. Okay, so the idea of an input type equals date, especially on mobile devices, is that it will bring forth the native date picker that's in your device. So on iOS, it will the three spinners, right? Or if it's on Android, it will sort of be like a calendar picker and everything like that. So you can, almost you can delegate your accessibility to your operating system in these situations, which is really, really useful. And in theory, on desktops and laptops, your browsers, whatever, you should get a fully accessible date picker, but without being forced to use it. One of the worst experiences for blind users using screen readers and keyboard-only users who might be sighted but can't use a mouse because of some motor impairment is to be forced to use a date picker, because it is the end of the world, basically. You should never, ever force someone to actually use a date picker. Always allow them to key a date in and have a date picker as an optional extra, right? For those people who like date pickers, right? Who likes date pickers? I'm sorry, they couldn't make it tonight. Okay, right, so browser support. Once again, iOS and Android, up for them, right? It does exactly what you'd expect it to do. So if your website is only ever going to be shown on an iOS or an Android device, that's cool, right? It's also good support in Firefox and Chrome. Hey, yes, including default dates and maximum minimum dates, right? We're getting a bit of a rosy feeling going on here. Okay. Not surprisingly, there's no support in IE 11. Okay. But also, more surprisingly, who's got a Mac here? Hardly anyone, I bet. Right, okay. Who uses Safari on their Mac? Okay. Yeah, quite. Because there's no support at all for input type equals date on a Mac, on Safari on a Mac, right? So this is what you get in using Chrome on an Android phone. You get this sort of calendar picker and there's ways, and this is fully accessible with TalkBack, the screen reader that's available on Android devices as well. Here I've got Chrome browser on Windows 10 on this machine here, and this is great because I can actually type stuff into here if I want to. I can get rid of the date I've already put in. I've got spinners as well. Okay, and if I want to, I can click on this button and it shows me the date picker, and so I can interact with that to my heart's content. That's great. Okay, this is what it looks like on Internet Explorer 11. Okay, now my label is set up to tell me, or to tell my users, my site visitors, what the format of the date I'm looking for. It's also got a default value set, right? But IE 11, because it doesn't support this, and it just thinks, what? It will actually put out the date in an international format, which is YYYYMMDD, as you can see, which contradicts what I've got here. Okay, so that's IE 11. This is what it looks like in Safari. It's very, very similar, actually. 2019-02-06. So if you type in the format that the label suggests, you'll get a message to say that's complete rubbish, basically. So, accessibility support, all right? Funnily enough, IE 11 and Safari on a Mac, this gives users a very poor experience. Yes, there are browser error messages as well. They're not read out by some screen readers. And also, we thought that iOS and Android got this right, but actually on Android, it's actually difficult to, if there's a previously selected value, it's actually difficult to hear what that is. It's quite a rigmarole to actually find out what date is already in there. And Dragon Naturally Speaking, I've not mentioned that so far. This is the industry standard voice recognition software, And it's almost impossible to use this control with Dragon Naturally Speaking. That's a fault of Dragon Naturally Speaking. It's not a fault of the control or the HTML5 definition, but it's just the way it works. So our recommendation, or my recommendation, is that you cannot use this in production at all to give a good accessible or user-friendly experience. I've written a couple of blogs about inputting dates, which you're invited to read, and but sadly, input type equals date is a no-go. Whilst we're on the subject of forms, how am I doing for time, Dan? Okay, sure. Thank you. Whilst I'm on the subject of form elements, how about if there was a native combo box you could use, right? So, like, for example, when you're typing in a search engine, you type a couple of characters and it shows you some useful options, right? That's what the data list element is all about, okay? So let's have a look at that. So, but on combo boxes, you can still type your own entry if required. It's difficult to get a fully accessible example. There are examples out there, and I quote one right at the end, but there's an awful lot of JavaScript going on, and you need to make sure that you get the keyboard accessibility working, otherwise sighted keyboard users won't be able to use it properly. There's a lot of ARIA going on as well. So let's have a look at the theory here. So I've got an input type equals text, with a label to go with it, obviously, and here is my list equals suggestions, okay? And here's my data list here, and with my ID of suggestions, and not surprisingly, like some of the accessibility things I talk about, you need an ID to link to, so we're pointing at something called suggestions, and so I've got a list there. And in Chrome, what you get, as soon as I start typing in here, it will show you this list of options at the bottom. It's good in Chrome. Android support is okay, but there's no support in Safari or iOS or Mac or whatever. Some bugs in IE11 and Edge. And it does work in Firefox, but only if you use it on input type equals text. So, where the browser support is present, because obviously there's no accessibility support if the browser doesn't support it, the keyboard functionality is pretty good. In Chrome, it's great. You can just start typing and then you use the down arrow key and it rolls down through the options, press the enter key, and it selects the one that you've chosen. Sadly, though, not all screen readers announce what's going on, so it's like, there's no point in having stuff like this if no one knows it's there. Okay, so as a screen reader user, if I'm typing into this text box, what I want is some little thing in my ear saying, oh, by the way, there's some options down there, have a look, right? Doesn't happen. And what's also useful, of course, is if I start typing like the list of the towns in Surrey, there's quite a few of those, so it would be really handy, wouldn't it, if I get some options showing, but it doesn't tell me how many there are, because if there's 5 or 6, then I can usefully use the up and down arrow keys to find and refine my search. But if there's 66 options, that's a bit of a drag, really. It doesn't work with JAWS screen reader, sadly. So we can't use that, really. It's a real pig, because actually that's a really useful bit of functionality. So, sadly, you're going to have to stick with the one that uses JavaScript and bits of ARIA. This website, though, the W3org, all the stuff about Way, ARIA, or however you say that, there's some good stuff in there, and that particular page is quite an informative page, and it's got you an example of how you can get this to work, and it goes through in line-by-line detail all the keyboard accessibility you need to set up, all the ARIA attributes you need to use, and when you should change the values, and then it's got some code snippets as well for you. So that's actually worth using. Okay, my last section is about a native accordion. Now, we had a good success, didn't we, at the start with the sectioning elements, and since then it's been a bit of a shame, right? So let's end with a little bit of a triumph, shall we? Giving the game away. Okay, so accordions are really useful bits of functionality, okay, because they save space on a page. I'm sure you've all seen them, like on frequently asked questions pages, and also, for example, in Wikipedia, especially in a mobile view and everything like that. It's a way of saving space, okay? But we need to make sure that our accordions are accessible to everybody. It's possible to do that with JavaScript and ARIA and what have you, but a native accordion would be really useful, wouldn't it? And it would also standardise the experience. The great thing about using browser controls, like native HTML, is that you get everything for free and it's kind of standard for everybody. That would be great. So here's my markup for my native accordion, okay? I've got a details element, which is sort of sits above the whole lot. And then within that, as my first child, I have a summary element. And then I have a paragraph of text that, or could be several paragraphs of text, could be anything basically, that describes the answer to the question or whatever, right? And this is what it looks like on Chrome, Windows 10, no styling, no nothing. Okay, so it's a little bit basic, but I've got an element with an arrow and system requirements. That's what it looks like when it's collapsed. If I click on it or tab to it and press the enter key, then what I get is this. So it opens up and it's now expanded and it actually shows me the rest of the stuff that's in there. So by default, I see what's in the summary element, and when I click on it, it opens it up and then I see the whole lot, right? Similarly, if I click on it again, it just rolls up and I see just move back to the initial place again. Okay? So browser support, it's very good in all modern browsers, right? There's no support in IE or Edge, that's the Microsoft Edge rather than the Chromium Edge, but there are polyfills that are available. This is little bits of JavaScript that will spot that there's no support for it in browsers and add in some stuff to make it work, including the necessary ARIA. Okay? If you have in Android your details contains a select element, because obviously you could have in your accordion a form or something like that. If it contains a select, it goes a little bit tits up. You can do some basic styling, okay? So here I've done very basic styling. I've actually changed the colour of the background and what have you, and I've actually changed also this very subtle colour here. You can change the image that's used as well, in the same way as it's using in CSS, in the same way that you change like a list image or something like that. It's quite straightforward to do. Accessibility support, it works with keyboard users, it works with voice recognition users, it works with screen readers, except a small bug with NVDA, for which I have raised a defect. And with a suitable polyfill, it can be perfect, even in IE as well. So use this polyfill and job done. Okay. The other thing you can do as well, and this makes it even easier for screen reader users to find these things, you can actually put a heading in the summary. Notice what I've done there, because screen reader users have the facility to search for headings in a page, so you can quickly find hard disk capacity, and then the screen reader will say, oh, and by the way, I'm in this element, right? And it identifies itself as an element that is interactive. So, we can see that what the HTML5 elements have done for accessibility, in theory, is a lot. The reality is that we've been let down by browsers and assistive technology vendors. So, probably from a browser vendor's perspective, it's that, well, if no one's using these elements, why bother, right? But of course, if you want to provide an accessible way of doing these things, and it's not accessible at the moment, you can't use these things, right? So it's a bit chicken and egg. So, see what I did there? Okay, so let's talk about how you can actually report defects, okay? If you find a defect or want to jump on the back of other people's defects, here's a list of links you can use, and another page of links that you can use. So there we go.
Thank you so much. Great as always. We do have time for some questions, if anybody has any at all. None at all?
Yes, sir.
So I'll just bring the mic over to you.
Why would some browsers not support some of this accessibility?
Why would, your question was why would some browsers not support stuff? That's a very good question. The input type equals date one and Safari. There's been a bug outstanding on Apple for years on that one. People keep jumping in and saying, look, when are you going to get this sorted? Apple don't seem to want to know. And there's a school of thought that if Apple didn't think of this stuff, then they're not interested. I'm sure that's not really the case, but it's sometimes what it seems like. I have no idea why people don't jump on because input type, all of these things, if they actually worked, then this would be a great way of not having to muck about with lots of JavaScript and ARIA for all these things, really. So I'm afraid I don't know why browsers don't. It's the same with also the assistive technologies, drag and naturally speaking, and the input type equals date. It's quite hard to report issues with drag and naturally speaking, and I did do it eventually once I sussed out how to do it. And their attitude was, yeah, you're right, it doesn't support it. So I said, well, when is it? Sorry, don't know. Bye. It's like there is lack of interest, for want of a better word.
Great question, thank you. Another question back there? Yep.
Hi, Graham. Thanks for talking. It's great. So, when you mentioned about some of these newer tags in particular, where they're not necessarily supported across all browsers, would you perhaps write some JavaScript to overcome that, and would that cause itself some problems for accessibility?
So your question is about polyfills, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you have to overcome any tags that are not supported across the browsers.
I did do some research on that when I was pulling this stuff together. I did for a series of blog posts, which I haven't finished writing yet, to be honest. So there'll be some more in the future for Hassel Inclusion, for whom I do a lot of work these days. But where, like, for example, with the summary and details, where the polyfills can actually fill the gap adequately, I have mentioned them. As far as I'm aware, with the other ones, it's not really, there's not a polyfill that I've come across that does the work. Now, your question is, could I write that JavaScript? I guess I probably could. JavaScript's not my strong suit, but I guess it would be possible to do that if you knew what you were doing.
But would that cause some problems maybe for accessibility if the JavaScript is in a certain way? Or?
I don't think so. For example, with the one around modals, it would be possible to the dialogue element. It would be possible to kind of piggyback on that to actually provide an accessible experience, because obviously modals do rely on JavaScript to function anyway, but you also need to, focus management becomes really important, but that's not impossible to do in JavaScript. Also then you've got like ARIA attributes going on to actually describe what's going on and what the modal is doing and stuff like that. Once again, in JavaScript, that's not impossible to do. So yeah, in theory, it would be possible to actually route your JavaScript routines on the dialog object rather than just a couple of divs or something like that.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, Silver?
I know this is going to be a good question.
It's not. I'll give you a question if you'd like afterwards, but just to add to this last point of polyfilling, it may, if you come up with a solution, it may take you a long time and it may fix it now, but if these browsers and assistive technologies if they come up with a solution in the future to cater for these HTML5 elements, you never know how that's going to break your current solution, so I'd always avoid it if possible.
Thank you, Ben. That's a good point, actually. Some of the polyfills that I have seen kind of try and rely on working out, sussing out whether an element support, a browser supports a certain element or not. There's tricks around that. So the polyfill has a look to see whether or not it's supported, and if it is supported, then it backs away and doesn't do anything. If you can find a reliable way around that, maybe that's the solution.
Excellent. I've got time for one more question.
So, are there any performance issues if you want to use all of these accessibility features in a web browser? But mostly, if you want to use it, if you are using a mobile phone and it's like the connection is not too strong, can these accessibility features cause any performance problems for loading or for crashing? Are there any measures of it?
Short answer, the question was around whether or not these using these elements would cause performance issues. So the short answer to your last part of your question, I don't think there are any measures on that. But I would say that if you could rely on the browser support for these things, in the same way as you would for like loads of other older HTML elements like forms and buttons and what have you like that, relying on the browser to do all the work, I'm sure that gives you one of the most efficient experiences that you could have. Obviously, for example, with a combo box or a style drop-down of some sort, if there's JavaScript doing some heavy lifting around showing stuff and hiding stuff, adding attributes and what have you, that's going to slow you down a little bit. But that comes down to how efficiently you write your JavaScript. So I'm sure there is a small impact on using JavaScript to get these things to work. But I would argue that if the JavaScript's well written, then it shouldn't really cause a significant, because none of this stuff is rocket science really, where you're using like JavaScript to hide and show stuff, which may be down to obviously changing the class name or something, right? And actually putting in ARIA attributes or changing the value of ARIA attributes. This is kind of quite simple stuff for JavaScript to do. You might want to be wary of using like a jQuery to actually sort of do very little stuff like that. You can do it quite easily in native JavaScript. So I wouldn't have imagined that there would be much overhead, and if the browsers did it for you, then I would, I'd assume that's fairly efficient, really.
Excellent. Well, Graham, thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, just going to quickly change this over. I just want to say a huge thank you to both our speakers, Louise and Graham, this evening. I think they deserve another big round of applause. Okay, so just going to very quickly wrap up once we've got some slides back up on the screen here. Nice and smooth. Okay, we're in completely the wrong set of slides. That's exactly the same. Yeah, that's got 6. So what's this one got? 25, yeah, that'll be the one. Okay, sorry about that. So just want to really quickly wrap up. So thank you to both speakers this evening. Thank you also to Paul, Diane, Leo, and the rest of the team that are helping bring this event together. And also thank you to all of you for attending this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you do have any feedback at all, then do come and have a chat with either myself, Diane, or Paul at the back there. We're continually looking to improve upon this in any way we can. So your feedback is completely valuable, so we'd love to hear from you. Just want to say a real quick thank you to our sponsors, Green Geeks, SiteGround, WP Engine, Plesk and Weglot for enabling us to be here this evening. I just mentioned feedback is important. If you want to do it anonymously, you can head over to wpldn.uk/feedback. You'll answer no more than 4 questions on a Google form, completely anonymous. We are back on the 26th of September, so we run events on the last Thursday of every month. So if you've enjoyed tonight, why not just book that out in your calendar? Make sure you're here every last Thursday of the month. If you are aware of other people that you think might benefit from an event like this, then please do help spread the word, and let's get this room filled with the 220, I think, is the capacity here. I just want to quickly mention our speakers for next month. We are going to be hearing from Paul Lacey and Rajendra Zor. So really looking forward to that. Two very different talks coming up. And again, I'd love to see you here being part of this and enjoying these talks. We are going to continue more of a social element now, if you can join us. We're going to head to, where do we say, All Bar 1, which is out the front door, take a left, first right, and it's on your right-hand side. Really easy to get to, fully accessible, so do come along and join us if you can. Just going to shoehorn this one in again. If you, just out of interest, does any cyclists in the room? Nope. Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was a tentative. If you are interested in any way, shape, or form, getting involved, then do head over to head2.org. There's a subscribe button a couple of scrolls down on the page. Drop your email in. We're not going to spam you with a load of rubbish, but we just want to let you know what's going on. If you want to apply to ride, if you want to become a volunteer, we'll let you know. Other than that, just want to say a big thank you to you all for being here this evening, and hopefully see you all next month. Thank you very much. Good night.